Hi everybody, welcome to Dr. Manny's YouTube Learnshops. In this session we review and discuss what socialization is. The learning objectives for this session are that at the end of this session you'll be able to define socialization, list some of the theories of socialization, name components of socialization and the functions, be able to name agents of socialization, which are essentially the institutions, and discuss self and socialization, and associate the lifespan changes with socialization and understand socialization in a professional context. So what then is socialization? Well, socialization is the process whereby people learn attitudes, values, actions appropriate to them as individuals and as members of a particular culture. All cultures are different. We learn the culture, language, gender and occupational roles and norms from our parents, from our teachers, from our peers and other members of that particular society. Western is different to Chinese, which is different to Indian, which is different to Malay, which is different to, for example here, Iban, Badawi, etc. There are all variations. What are some of the socialization theories? Well, the theories are basically about understanding social processes. And we've already touched on 6 previously. These are all institutions or agents. We looked at, for example, here, politics, religion, family, education. There are many, many, many more. It was Charles Darwin, during his period of time, that discussed the role of nature and the theory of evolution. And Darwinists believe that it's about the survival of the fittest. And this is the idea that certain people become powerful in society because they're naturally better at it. Born leaders, born educators, born. Natural selection was used to justify behavior which was instinctive. Then you've got Sigmund Freud, which you've already touched on. And he believed in the role of personality. And he advanced the psychodynamic view of human personality that implicated the id, ego and superego as the main determinants of individual differences in personality. There are social norms and childhood experiences which have a lasting impact on our personality. And as some of you are already, not experts, but you're certainly exposed to his theory, and id is basically the desire of wants. The superego is the morals and conscious rules. And somewhere in between the ego is negotiation. Then you've got J.B. Watson. And he looked at the role of nurture and classical conditioning. And his theory was of behaviorism and applying it to childhood development. And he believed a child's environment is a factor that shapes behaviours over their genetic makeup or natural temperament. I agree. I agree. Environment is a very important agent in what you become. Genetics is important too, but from my perspective, environment plays a very significant role. You can be born who you are, but the environment will make you evolve into whatever it's exposing you to. Then you've got Charles Horton Cooley, and he believed in the social mirror theory, the looking glass self. And this is where using the social interaction as a type of mirror. People use judgments they receive from others to measure their own worth, their values and behaviour. So for example, if someone's constantly telling you that you're stupid, that you're ugly, that you're not a good person, you may eventually come to believe that. However, if you get positive reinforcement from your father or your mother or a peer or someone that you believe is your role model, and they're telling you how good you are, how good you can become, then possibly that will have a major influence on your development. And this theory basically states that a person's self-growth out of society's interpersonal interactions and the perceptions of others. Then you have George Herbert Mead, who believed in social self theory. And he believed that self emerges from social interactions such as observing and interacting with others, responding to others' opinions about oneself, and then internalizing these external opinions and internal feelings about oneself. The self is not there from birth, but it develops over time from social experiences and activities that create your personality. As you're already aware, children copy the behaviours, which again we know as role play, of others around them without sophisticated understanding of what they're imitating. So basically, role play or imitation, you may not know what you're imitating, but because you see it constantly now here, for example, your father being very, very nice to your mother, then maybe if you're a boy, you'll treat your future wife in a nice way. However, if you constantly see your father beating your mother, or you're watching mass media that it purports the fact that it's okay to be physically abusive to a female, then maybe you may do exactly the same thing as you get older. Now let's look at self and socialization. It's socialization that shapes us into who we are, self. It regulates our actions, our thoughts, our ideas, our motivations. You've got primary socialization, which is in the early years. And we already touched on aspects related to this in behavioural sciences. And it's a long, slow process of growth across our whole lifespan. And hopefully it changes undesirable habits into desirable ones. And hopefully it's teaching us about morals and ethics, about what is right and what is wrong. It also considers nature, which is our genes, our biological development, and nurture, which is what we get from the environment, or how we are raised. Some of you touched on Lawrence Kohlberg's theory. All of you have read about it. And he purported the moral development theory. How people view what is right or what is wrong. And his theory suggested there were 3 stages of moral development: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional, which I'm not going to touch on in any great detail, other than to mention it. In the pre-conventional, you're looking at avoiding punishment, and it's about self-interest, which typically occurs between the ages of 3 and 7. Then you've got the conventional, which is to do with moral reasoning, law and order morality, the good boy attitude, which typically occurs between the ages of 8 and 13, or the good girl attitude. The post-conventional is in adulthood, and this is about moral reasoning, and it's based on personal ethics, because we have a social contract with society, and we should be purporting principles, ethics. Then you've got Erikson, and some of you touched on him as well, with his 8 stages of psychosocial development. And he saw socialization as a lifelong process and developed in order, a predetermined order. And he said, through 8 stages of psychosocial development, we became who we became. And this ranged from infancy to adulthood. And he stated that each stage has a psychosocial crisis, which has a positive or a potential negative outcome on our personality development. And it's how we deal with it that decides on how we become in relation to our personality. There are essentially 5 types of socialization. You've got primary socialization, secondary socialization, developmental socialization, and anticipatory socialization. Primary socialization is considered the most important, and it occurs during infancy and childhood, and it's usually within our family. And this is where we learn basic norms and customs. We learn specific skills, language, how to communicate, how to interact, which forms emotional bonds. Primary identities are formed in relation to our gender roles and related to our culture, our ethnicity. Toilet training can be an example of primary socialization. Secondary socialization takes place outside of the home, and it's influenced by your school, your peers, especially during adolescence, mass media such as television, films, radio, and this occurs over your whole life cycle. Secondary socialization identities are enhanced from primary identities. So for example, things like ethnicity, leisure, occupational and professional activities. An example of secondary socialization is entering a new profession or relocating into a new environment or society. The new environment is school. I mean, you're going from home to, for example, kindergarten, preschool. And then after preschool, you go to primary 1. After primary 1, you go to primary 2. After primary 2, you may go to university or into a work environment. Your case, you're going from university into a hospital environment. Then you've got occupational socialization, which is a form of secondary socialization. And this is the learning of cultural norms, attitudes, values, behaviours, which are necessary to recognise and sustain competence within a context of employment. So when you get a job, you're going to have to change. You're being socialised into another situation, just like you've been socialised into your nursing, career and profession. And this is where education gained from colleagues in the workplace, and these could include skills through training, simulation, informal work norms, peer group values and relationships. You learn from others. Then you've got professional socialization, another form of secondary socialization. And this refers to the acquisition of values, attitudes, skills and knowledge pertaining to that specific profession. Your situation again. And the goal is to internalise the professional identity. For example, nursing students are exposed to nursing values during the nursing program as they observe the behaviour of the nursing faculty. Hopefully that you're looking at your lecturers or your clinical instructors as role models, if they deserve to be role models. Because just because they have that title doesn't mean that they're good role models. Then you've got developmental socialization. And in this type of socialization, it involves learning process where the focus is on developing social skills. So for example, a shy fourth year uni maths nursing student starts to teach at the bedside to new first year students, in order to develop her own verbal communication skills. She's doing it for her development as well as for your knowledge. Another form of socialization is anticipatory socialization. And this is the process of rehearsing, which really essentially is simulation, before an event occurs. So for example, it could be law school students learning how to behave like lawyers, older people preparing for retirement, you as nursing students practicing to become registered practitioners, whether it's doing basic life support resuscitation, doing here addressing, as in the picture, auscultating a chest for chest sounds, heart or pulmonary. Then you've got resocialization. And resocialization is a process in which a person is taught new norms, values and practices that foster their transition from one social role to another. An example could be to include the process of resocializing new recruits into the military so that they can operate as soldiers. Also consider it could be changing religion. You may decide that another religion is more to your faith. What are some of the components of socialization? Components include the agent or the institution. This is someone who serves as a source for what's being learned. It's a learning process. There's a target, a person who's being socialized, and there's an outcome, something that is being learned. What are some of the agents of socialization? Already we've touched on. And the agents of socialization all affect you. Socialization, the family. And as we've touched on previously, the family, it's the most important agent of socialization. The child's social life has considerable bearing on the child's future orientations and values. And it can have intentional, conscious, or unintentional, unconscious consequences. Look at the image. Then you've got socialization in school. And school teaches you subject knowledge, life skills, social skills through your interactions with your teachers, staff and other students. And it's critical to obtain new knowledge and skills for future adult roles. It imparts cultural values and establishes contact with others from diverse social backgrounds. The evolution of your transition. Then you've got mass media. Socialization in relation to mass media. And mass media is communication. It includes newspapers, magazines, radio, television, the internet. All play an important role in the processes of socialization. And it transmits information and messages which influence the personality of an individual to a very great extent. Media affects socialization because it influences values, beliefs, attitudes and behaviours. Religious socialization is an extremely interactive process through which social agents influence individuals' religious beliefs and understandings. And this can have an important effect on all aspects of life. Parental religious participation is the most influential part of religious socialization. If your parents believe, you believe as well. And it's more than just religious peers or religious beliefs. Then you've got the functions of socialization. And the functions of socialization establish our social identity, who we are. It teaches us roles, understanding others, controls our behaviour. How does socialization control our behaviour? It transmits our culture to the next generation. Why is it important to transmit our culture to the next generation? All aspects that you should be thinking of. What's the importance of socialization? Consider, human beings are not born social. Nearly all human social behaviour is learned. It begins, as you know, at birth, and is a lifelong process, which you already know. Most important learning begins in early life, which we've already established. Without it, infants cannot develop a sense of attitude, beliefs, values and behaviours that are associated with being an individual. The importance of socialization is essential for survival of both the individual and the group itself, which is that society or that culture. It's what makes us human. So let's review the life cycle socialization, which again you are already familiar with. Yes, socialization continues through the life cycle. At each stage there are transitions or a crisis which must be overcome. And look, it depends on the theorist that you're following. Just remember, no one said the theorists are correct. They're just theorists. You may not agree with their theory. You may have your own theory. However, we're looking at specific theorists to look at their theories to appreciate how it relates to social sciences and, as we did in behavioural sciences. So essentially there are 5 stages: childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, middle adulthood and late adulthood. In childhood, this is the age span ranging from birth to adolescence, and it's divided into developmental stages which can be referred to as toddlerhood, early childhood, middle childhood and adolescence. Toddlerhood is when you're learning to walk. Early childhood is your play age. Middle childhood is your school age. Adolescence, puberty through to post-puberty, adulthood. Infancy. This is the earliest and shortest stage of human development, and there are many physical milestones that occur during this stage. As an infant, you control or gain control over your body. But infants rely on others to meet their needs and learn to trust people, as you already are aware. And depending on the theorist that you're looking at, it's not just about Erikson, it can be any number of different theorists. But trust is very important, because if you don't trust, you mistrust, and that can have an effect on your personality. Then you've got the social and emotional development. This is a child's ability to understand the feelings, not only their own, but of others, and control his or her own behaviours, get along with other human beings, children, and build relationships with adults. Adolescence. You're already aware of this as well. It's a transitional stage or phase of growth and development between childhood and adulthood. What are some of the characteristics? Biological growth and development, an undefined status, which means role confusion, increased decision making, increased pressures, wanting to find out who you are and where you're going. Identity versus role confusion. 12 to 18 years of age. Teenagers explore who they are as individuals and seek to establish a sense of their self, and may experiment with different roles, activities and behaviours. The process is one of forming a strong identity and developing a sense of direction in their life. Identity crisis. Personal psychosocial conflicts, especially in adolescence. And it involves confusion about one's social role and often a sense of loss of continuity to one's personality. Erikson's theory, one of many, the way a person resolves the crisis will determine their personal identity and future development. Teenage sexuality. This is an expression of interest, orientation, preference. Where are they going? What do they want to become? And this is thinking about both the same sex and the opposite sex, and it's quite common in teenagers until they sort out through their emotional and emerging sexual feelings. Some teens may experiment with members of the same or the opposite sex as they explore their own sexuality. It's a normal part of adolescence. Then you've got separation anxiety, which is an excessive fear or worry about separation from home or an attachment figure. It's a normal stage of an infant or child's development, and it helps them understand the relationships and masters their environment. In young adulthood, this is where a person ranging in the age from their late teens, early 20s to 30s. And this is the young adult stage in human development that precedes middle adulthood. This is where career can be important, and career has got 5 stages that are most important that people will go through during their adult years, regardless of the type of work they do. And this involves exploration, early career, which is establishment, mid-career promotion, late career management, and decline being retirement. Marriage and family will become important. Family development theory, this is where the life cycle family changes. And this involves early marriage, families with young children, launching the children out of the home, the empty nest syndrome. Then you've got middle adulthood, between 40 and 65 years of age. And Erikson referred to this as the generivity versus the stagnation stage. And this is where persons in this stage may have some cognitive loss. This loss usually remains unnoticeable because life experiences and strategies are developed by people to compensate for any decrease in their mental abilities. Then you've got midlife crisis. A midlife crisis typically occurs in adulthood, typically between 40 and 60 years of age, and this is where someone may realise their own mortality. And maybe this is as a result of death of their parents or friends or just getting older. So causes related to midlife crisis can be ageing itself, regrets about your work or career or lack of, regrets about not having a wife or a partner, husband, maturation of the children or lack of having any children. Then you've got menopause. And menopause is a stage in life when a woman stops having her monthly period. It's a normal part of aging and marks the end of a woman's reproductive years. Menopause typically occurs in a woman's life between 40 and 50. Then you've got late adulthood, referred to as old age, typically 65 plus, and Erikson suggested that at this time it was important that you find meaning and satisfaction in your life rather than becoming bitter and disillusioned. He referred to it as integrity versus despair. Then you have the empty nest syndrome. And in the empty nest syndrome, this is a phenomenon which some parents experience, whether you've got feelings of sadness and loss when the last child leaves home. Although they might actively encourage their children to become independent, the experience of letting their children go can be quite painful. And again, this can be related to mother and father or both. Then you've got socialization, death and dying. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified 5 stages. Ultimately here from oncology patients, but she identified 5 stages which were denial, anger, negotiation, which can be considered as bargaining, resignation, which results in possibly depression, and then eventually acceptance. Then you have the psychology of facing death. And the psychology of facing death is also referred to as Thanatophobia, a fear of death or the dying process. And typically here, it's normal for someone to worry about their own health as they age. It's also common for someone to worry about their friends and their family after they're gone. Who's going to look after them? Erikson referred to it as ego integrity versus despair, and it was the 8th and final stage of his theory. So in summary, socialization is a part of a continuous cycle of interaction between individuals and the people around them. It involves social factors which deal with control and influence our behaviour as human beings. And it's important to remember that human beings have the ability to reason, communicate, and make moral and ethical judgments. So the conclusions basically are, not a bad quote, become friends with people who aren't your age. Hang out with people whose first language isn't the same as yours. Get to know someone who doesn't come from your social class, and this is how you see the world. This is how you grow as a person. Everyone you meet always asks you if you have a career. Are you married? Or do you own a house? As if life was some kind of grocery list. But no one ever asks you if you're happy. Well, that concludes this session. Thanks again. Check out any of the other Learnshops on YouTube, Dr. Manny's Learnshops on YouTube, if you're interested to do so. Bye for now.